So last week, we explored the authority of Jesus over both the spiritual and physical realm. And we discovered that Jesus' authority comes from who he is, fully God and the full human that we were intended to be. And because his authority came from who he was and not from the approval or the blessing of others or any person or any group, he walked in confidence that was expressed through humility. And we also discovered that he used his power through the Holy Spirit. And when he did, it was used to extend forgiveness and mercy and to heal and to protect. Now, the stories that we read last week were all primarily miracles that Jesus had performed. And if you recall, we observed Jesus forgiving the sins of a man who was paralyzed and then instructing him to get up and walk because of the faith demonstrated by his friends. And then we witnessed Jesus healing the servant of the Roman centurion, right? He didn't even have to go visit the home. He could just simply say, "Your servant is healed." And the Roman centurion understood this, and Jesus was amazed by his faith. And then we went on to, Jesus had this brilliant idea to cross the Sea of Galilee to the east side. And as they're crossing, he and the disciples run into this massive storm, and Jesus was asleep on the boat, remember? And they're panicking and they're crying out loud over the wind and the waves. Jesus, wake up, we're going to die. And he wakes up, and again, with a word, he calms the storm. And as they arrived on the other side, there was a man that was possessed by demons. And remember, the demons recognized the authority of Jesus, right? And Jesus healing the man and restoring the man, this man then becomes, the story ends where he is clothed and in his right mind and sitting at the feet of Jesus, sitting at the feet of Jesus, learning in the position of a disciple. And the people, though, aren't too pleased, right? Because this type of authority, this kind of power, what could it mean for them? What if it changed everything for them? What if it ruined and upended all of the ways that they did things, their economy, the things that they worshiped? It was a disruptive kind of power that they were experiencing. And so they begged Jesus to leave. And then the man begs to go with Jesus. But Jesus says, no, you stay here, go home, and tell everyone what God has done for you. So here we are in our story today. And Jesus and the disciples have just returned from their fun little trip over to the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And now they're returning back to the western shores. And the people there, the crowd there, is welcoming him. I mean, what a difference between leaving being kind of run out of town to arriving and being welcomed by the people. But, people change their minds quickly. And not too long in the future, the crowds begin to call for Jesus' death. But that's going to come later, and we'll circle back to that a little bit later today even. But for right now, the crowds are amazed at the healing that Jesus is doing, the forgiveness of sins. They haven't yet heard the story of the crossing of the Sea of Galilee, but they'll hear it soon. And so Jesus and his disciples had been through a lot, right? They'd had a near-death experience on the first boat ride over. They arrive and they have an encounter with demons. Then they're run out of town. And we're not told, but I'm going to assume that the ride back across the Sea of Galilee was a little more peaceful. And hopefully Jesus was able to finish his nap because he was going to need to be rested for what awaited him, right? So they arrive and there's all of these crowds. And surely in the crowd, there were many people who needed to experience the healing of Jesus. But the story that Joy read for us today, really two stories in one. There are two people who are so desperate that they will ignore the social norms and they will place themselves at the feet of Jesus in their desperation, begging for his mercy. So as we walk through these two stories that are tied together, I want us to pay attention to some important aspects. So this is me saying, hey, listen for these things as we walk through the story. The first is, how does time function in these two stories? And the second is, what are the implications of someone being clean and unclean? And the last is, how does Jesus engage with people? Okay, so we're really going to just observe this story together. Now, among the crowd, one of the people who was so desperate was a man named Jairus. And he was a leader in the synagogue. This could have meant that he served in an official capacity. It could also mean that he was a major donor to the synagogue. Either way, he was a person of prominence in the community. So here's this person of prominence whose daughter has been sick. We don't know how long, but she's been sick and it's getting to the end and everybody knows it. And so he is there in the crowd and he's waiting for Jesus to arrive. When Jesus finally comes off of the boat, falling at Jesus' feet, he begs him to come and heal his daughter, his one and only daughter. Now, where he would have had a lot of prominence and importance in the community, his daughter, who was just entering womanhood, had not yet, she would have been not very important at all, to be honest, in that cultural mindset. Her importance was much lower than the importance of her father. And maybe her dad didn't hear the stories about Jesus just healing the person by saying the word. I don't know, but for some reason, he wants Jesus to come and to touch her, to heal her. And so he pleads at Jesus' feet. Now just imagine this, a person of great prominence falling to their knees in front of Jesus. Now, falling to your knees in front of somebody is the embodiment of the truth that this person has authority and power and that you are at their mercy. And so he is humbling himself before Jesus in this moment of desperation. So Jesus sees this, and as we've talked about recently, Jesus responds very well to people who acknowledge their need for him. Right? And so Jesus begins walking, but it's not like this is a Red Sea moment, okay? The crowds are not parting, letting them through. Think more like a sporting event or a concert or like a rally of some sort. And there's just a crowd of people that is pressing in, right? Like you've seen like video footage of like a famous person being out in public and people swarm to them, right? And they can hardly move. So that's what's happening here. Can you imagine how anxious Jairus must have been? How long had he already waited for Jesus to return? And now, when they were so close, they were being held up by this crowd. And then, seemingly for no reason, Jesus stopped. And as he stopped, he asks a crazy question: who touched me? And after everyone denies being the one to touch Jesus, Peter states the obvious, as he often does. Master, everyone is pressing against you. Like, what are you even saying? And it is a curious question. Like, why did Jesus draw attention to the woman? Why didn't he just keep going? He acknowledges it's by her faith that she's healed. Yes, but she could have been healed and he could have just kept walking and going to this emergency. There's an emergency. A girl is dying. Like, why is Jesus stopping? And not only is it a girl who's dying, it's the girl of a prominent person in the community. If you let the daughter of this prominent person in the community die, when you could have gotten there to heal her, this could be problematic. Now, I imagine for Jairus, the desperation and anxiety just keeps building the longer this goes on, right? Who did it? Who did it? Was it you? Was it you? Jesus, of course. How could you possibly tell? And Jairus is probably standing there thinking, what is happening? We need to get going. And then a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years came forward. It says that she came trembling as she fell at his feet. And in the presence of all of the people, she revealed her greatest shame. That she was bleeding for the past 12 years meant that for 12 years she was always ceremonially unclean. If she touched anyone, that person would become unclean for the remainder of the day. So she could not touch and she could not be touched for 12 years. The same amount of time that Jairus' daughter had lived. These last 12 years. And just like the man with demons, she lived in isolation, removed from society. Now, it tells us that she was searching for healing and spent everything that she had. So not only is she unclean and ostracized for that, but she also is poor. Scientific studies have indicated that social isolation can have significant effects on mental and physical health, including increased risk of heart disease, dementia, depression, and even premature death. So in other words, she was desperate. And in the presence of the entire crowd, she described her suffering and she confessed her shame. Because just like Jairus, she was driven by desperation to ignore all of the social expectations for her. She was not supposed to be in the crowd. Every single person she is touching is becoming ceremonially unclean. And we just discussed this as a crowd that's very close to one another. They're pressing in, right? And in her desperation, knowing that by touching Jesus, she's going to make him unclean, she still reaches out and touches the hem of his garment. And when she did, she was instantly healed. The text uses the word instantly, immediately. And in that moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone out from him. And so he stopped. Now, he could have, once she admitted all of these things, he could have said, how could you make so many people unclean? He could have said, how could you make me unclean? But instead, he told her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Her wait was over. Her 12 years of suffering had come to an end. In Mark's telling of this story in the Gospel of Mark, he says that Jesus said, go in peace and be free from your suffering. So let's turn our attention to Jairus again. He's watching all of this unfold. And as he is, I'm sure he's becoming more anxious and more desperate, right? Just by the time of just waiting. You ever trying to get somewhere? You're in an emergency and you're just stuck and you can't move. But not only that, now he hears that the person he was depending on to heal his daughter is now ceremonially unclean. Would they have to wait until tomorrow for Jesus to heal his daughter? Would she live that long? And then what he feared the most happened. While Jesus was still speaking to the woman, some messengers came to Jairus to tell him that his daughter had died. And Jesus hears this, and he turns his attention back to Jairus, and he tells him, don't be afraid. Just believe, and she will be healed. Now, in the moment that Jairus' greatest fears come crashing down, Jesus says, do not be afraid. And when they finally arrive, there are mourners already there. Now, it was always interesting to me that these people who were just mourning 2 seconds ago are now laughing at Jesus. Like, are they emotionally disconnected from what's happening right now? How do you go from mourning to laughing that quickly? Well, these mourners were likely professional mourners. So even for the poorest of people, you had to have at least 3 mourners, 2 that would play the flute or an instrument, and at least 1 woman who would be wailing. That would be the minimum. So for this man of prominence, it would be a big production. It would be a lot of people wailing and wailing, just demonstrating the grief and the loss for this family, for this man of prominence in the community. And so when they arrive, Jesus says, stop. Stop what you're doing. You are a little early. She's only sick. But they're like, what? We know she's dead. So they start laughing at him, right? So Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and Jairus and the girl's mother into the room. And he takes the girl by the hand. So here's the thing. When somebody had died, if somebody touches a corpse, they are now ceremonially unclean for 7 days. But Jesus was already ceremonially unclean. And so he just takes her by the hand. And we'll find out that he actually wasn't unclean. This is part of the great mystery here. But he takes her by the hand. And he says in Aramaic, this is from the Gospel of Mark, we know, he says in Aramaic, Talitha koum, which means, little girl, get up. And she gets up, and her parents are told to feed her. And then Jesus does something interesting. He tells them not to tell anyone. Which is odd, because I feel like everybody already knew she was dead. I mean, there was a loud production happening outside, right? But Jesus, maybe he's like, just let them think that she was sick and she was healed, right? There was a mistake. She didn't actually die. Somebody spread the wrong news, right? She was just sick and she was healed. But Jesus says, don't tell anyone. Which is interesting because right on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, when he's leaving, he tells the man to go tell everyone. So what is happening here? Why on one side of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus is like, go tell everyone. And on this side of the Sea of Galilee, he's like, let's keep this just between us. You know? Something is happening here that is bigger than what we can see. So let's go back to our questions at the beginning. How does time function in both stories? We see that there's a 12-year-old girl, and the woman had 12 years of bleeding. There is a waiting in both stories. One is a waiting in an emergency, right? One is the type of desperation that comes from, just like the disciples, we're about to die, and we're waiting for Jesus to show up. And in the one case with the disciples, he's sleeping soundly. And in this case, he's just taking his sweet old time and stopping and engaging with other people on the way. There's also waiting for this woman for 12 years, this long-term condition that she had. There's uses of the words instantly and at once. So here's the thing. There's a lot of waiting, but when Jesus moves, it happens quickly. There's a lot of this, Jesus, what are you doing? Why are you sleeping? Why are you stopping? Can't you see this as an emergency? Right? There's a lot of this waiting, but when Jesus moves, people are healed instantly. And so we come back to the question, why did he instruct the parents not to tell anyone? Now remember, we talked about how the crowds, as humans, we quickly forget things, and our minds and our choices, like we question everything, right? One minute we're like, yes, this is great. And the next minute we're like, maybe this is the worst thing that's ever happened, right? Like we're so back and forth and tossed by like this boat on the sea. We're tossed about. And that's how humans are. And Jesus knew that. And he knew that this crowd that had welcomed him and was calling him, and was pressing in because they wanted to be healed, right? They wanted to see what he was going to do next. They wanted to hear his teaching. This crowd that adored him. He knew that soon that would change. And this crowd would be calling for his death. Jesus knows things. He is outside of our understanding of time. Right? Like Jesus looks at us, looks at our lives, looks at our plans for our lives, and he's like, that's nice. And yes, he wants us to come to him in desperation. And he wants us to come to him in our waiting and in our pleading. But when we do, we must be okay with him answering in his good time. And that might not make sense to us. It might not be the same as what we're hoping for. So the second one, unclean and clean. After being healed, as I mentioned, after touching a corpse, a person would be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. Similarly, this girl, this woman who had the bleeding condition, after the blood stops, you're still ceremonially unclean for another 7 days. So it's another parallel that we're seeing between these two stories. And in general, the understanding within the law is that being unclean is contagious, right? If I am touched by somebody who's unclean, I become unclean. But this isn't what happens with Jesus. Instead, Jesus, being holy, being clean, without sin or stain, his holiness, his cleanness, is contagious. I don't know what it is in your life, and to be honest, I often don't even want to look or consider what it is in my own life that is truly unclean. But the good news is that that doesn't define who we are, right? If we have come into the presence of Jesus, if we have sought his forgiveness for our sins, we become clean as he is clean. His holiness is our holiness. And the last one, how does Jesus engage with the people? We asked the question earlier, why stop? Why not just keep going? She'd still be healed. But Jesus acknowledges her in front of the community. And there's an acknowledgement that's directly to her. He says, daughter. He uses the word daughter. Your faith has healed you. He lifts her up in the community and says, what you did wasn't shameful. What you did coming into this place where you're not supposed to be, that's not shameful. What you did reaching out to touch my garment, knowing that it could make me unclean, that's not shameful. It was full of faith. It was an action from desperation, and it was full of faith, and therefore it was good because you acknowledged that I could heal you. It is your faith that has made you well. Go in peace. He blesses her. He assures her that her suffering has ended, that it's not coming back. He assures her. He lifts her up in front of the community. He assures her that she is healed and it's not coming back. And in doing so, he restores her to community. The community has all heard. They can no longer avoid her. right? Or wonder why. They've all heard she has been restored to community. And Jesus touches the little girl, right? And he holds her hand and he speaks to her in her heart language of Aramaic. Little girl or daughter, get up. Jesus is so personal with each person who's in front of him. Even when Jairus, right? Even when Jairus was like freaking out because these people had just said that his daughter had died. In his moment of desperation and devastation, Jesus sees him and immediately speaks to that fear and says, do not be afraid. Immediately he speaks to his fear. So we have this picture of this woman reaching out to Jesus. We have this picture of Jesus reaching out to the little girl. And there's this real amazing thing in this almost dance in our faith with Jesus, where we reach out to him in our desperation and where he reaches out to us in his healing, where we reach out to him in our faith and he reaches out to us in his love. There's this beautiful back and forth between us and Jesus as we work through our faith and our confusion and not understanding why things are happening or not happening in the ways that they are and in the time that they are. So we're going to enter into a time of silence. And as we're quiet, I just want you to ask the Spirit to speak to you.